Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and this is a very special video, not least because I think we've worked out around £12,000 or so worth of phones on this table. I've got pretty much every flagship phone on the market right now. There's a couple of notable exceptions. I don't have the Galaxy Fold, I don't have the ROG Phone 2, and a couple of other ones that I would like to have included, but I had to send those back because they're review samples, although most of these are, in fact. So this video is going to be a bit different because I actually want your help as well. Hopefully this will serve as a bit of a buying guide if you're looking for a new top-end flagship phone. I'll run you through all the pros and cons of each, but at the same time I want you to help me out because I have a very good problem in a way that I'm lucky enough to have access to all these amazing phones, but I'm not sure which one to use. I'm going between the OnePlus, the Google, the iPhone, the Note 10, the Huawei. To be honest, this doesn't even come close to covering every phone that's out there. I'd love to have more from Realme, Oppo, Xiaomi, a lot of these other brands that perhaps aren't quite as big in the UK and the US at the moment as they are in China and Asia, but you know, they are absolutely worth considering. So don't think of this as a phone of the year video because there are a lot more options. This is more like a what's the best flagship phone out there right now kind of buying guide. So first up, we've got the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, which actually is also the oldest phone here. Old is very relative. I mean, this came out back in March, so it's one of the first 2019 phones that we were looking at. And I still think it's one of the best all-rounders. And actually, because the price has dropped a little bit since launch, we're looking at around sort of £680, £700 now for the Plus with 128 gigs of storage. I must admit, I really do like the S10 Plus. It's got a really nice premium design, IP68 water resistance. It has the 3.5mm headphone jack, which I believe is the only phone on the table. I think, does the Sony have it? No. Yeah, it's the only phone, aside from the S10 Plus 5G I've got here, that has a headphone jack. So that may be enough reason alone for you to go for the S10 Plus. But we've got a great camera with a triple lens setup, including the ultra-wide lens, in-screen fingerprint reader, stereo speakers, one of the best looking AMOLED screens you can get, dual front camera so you can get a bit of a wider selfie, which is handy. So while it has been overtaken a little bit in a few areas, they're all pretty minor. And actually for the price, as I say, of around $700, which goes about the same as the OnePlus 7T Pro, I still think this is definitely worth considering. But as I say, this video is about the best flagship phone and also the one that I'm going to use, and so since I have access to all these other ones, that probably isn't going to be the one I end up using. But let's move on to the S10 Plus 5G. This is the fancy custom space selfie one that Samsung sent me, and actually it is very similar to the S10 Plus. The biggest difference really is the size. It does have a bigger screen, it's also got a slightly bigger battery, and also we now have the time of flight 3D lens on the back, which helps with augmented reality and also live focus video. And I think with that 5G support, which makes it a little more future-proof, and that bigger screen, which I do quite like, this is still worth considering, although it does cost obviously a little bit more than the standard S10 Plus. Then we have the Note 10 Plus, the third and final Samsung phone that I've got here, and this is kind of like their ultimate phone. It's bigger, it's more powerful, it's more expensive, and of course, famous for the the Note series, sorry, it has the S Pen, which for a lot of people is a really big reason to go for this. It becomes more of a productivity or work tool. We've got loads of storage, big battery, the S Pen, this nice big screen. It is obviously quite a lot more expensive than the S10 Plus. We're looking at nearly £1,000. Triple camera setup on the back, and actually I've just finished my Pixel 4 versus iPhone versus Note 10 Plus camera comparison, so after this I definitely recommend going to check that out because the results are kind of interesting actually. There aren't really that many downsides. I mean, it is expensive. It's also still a 60Hz screen, unlike the Pixel 4 and the OnePlus 7T series that we have here, so it's not quite as smooth as that. But if you want an all-singing, all-dancing phone and price is no object, then this is definitely worth considering, so we'll probably come back to this one. So with the Samsungs out of the way, let's move on to a couple of Huawei phones. And firstly, we've got the P30 Pro, which is probably the closest competitor to the S10 Plus as it came out earlier in the year. I really like the P30 Pro. It has fantastic battery life and incredible cameras, plus this periscope lens that can give you up to 10 times hybrid zoom. If I'm honest, Huawei's EMUI software isn't my favorite. It's much better than it used to be, but it doesn't quite come close to, you know, stock Android, iOS, but it's still good, and EMUI 10 is actually a nice upgrade as well. If you want a phone with a long battery life, a triple camera setup with incredible low light modes, and also that periscope zoom lens, then this is definitely worth considering. And because it's been out for a little while, like the S10 Plus, the price has come down a bit, so that is worth considering, but probably not for me because, like the S10 Plus, it has been overtaken a bit. Which leads us nicely onto the very controversial Huawei Mate 30 Pro. I love this phone, I absolutely do. It has an incredible camera setup, one of the best, if not the best, battery life you can get on a phone right now. I don't really love the software virtual volume rocker on it, but it feels good, it looks amazing. This absolutely would have been one of my go-to phones and, you know, potential phone of the year territory. Like, there's so much going on here. The crazy slow motion, I like the design, EMUI 10 plus Android 10 was a nice software upgrade, dual speakers. There's a 5G version which also supports dual 5G SIMs, which you don't get very often. It goes against the Note 10 Plus in terms of all singing, all dancing, crazy expensive but amazing phone. But of course, as you know, there's a big problem with the lack of the Google Play services. Until something changes, unfortunately, and because you know, the ways of actually getting Google Play services keeps getting harder and harder to do, the workarounds are getting sort of closed off. Unfortunately, I just can't use the Mate 30 Pro right now, as much as I would genuinely love to. Fingers crossed something changes in the next few months, or by the time we get to the P40 Pro next year. That's by far the biggest, what a shame sort of moment I've had this year. I want to love it, I do love it, but I can't use it. Then we've got the Sony Xperia 1, and I think this is one of the more underrated phones of the year. The reason why I don't love it is the camera, which is weird because Sony make most of the sensors that go in all these phones, but their software, their processing doesn't quite match with everything else. We get a triple lens setup, we get a 4K 21:9 OLED screen with stereo speakers. If you want a phone just for watching stuff, watching movies, then you can't really beat this. The battery life is solid, it looks good. I really like the sort of how it feels with that aspect ratio. It's not too wide, it doesn't feel too big. It's still quite expensive. This, even though it came out a good few months ago, is still about £850, and the cameras just aren't quite up to par with the rest, which is a shame. Moving on to the iPhones. So when my friends ask me what phone they should buy, I usually start with, well, what's your budget? And then I'll say, okay, do you want Android or Apple, you know, iOS? And if they say, oh, I'm used to using iPhones, I want an iOS phone, most of the time I'll then recommend the standard iPhone 11, which starts at about £670, and it has the same incredible camera as the bigger Pro models, although we do lose that telephoto lens. And yes, it has an LCD screen, and yes, the resolution isn't that high, it's sort of halfway between 720p and 1080p, but when you're actually using it, you just don't notice. For value for money, for the Apple iOS 13 experience, for the terrific camera, I think Apple have done really well here. The only real reason I would recommend paying more for the Pros is if you want a better battery life, because while the 11 does last about an hour longer than last year's 10R, the Pro and the Pro Max are significantly better than last year's 10S and 10S Max when it comes to battery life. Plus we have that third telephoto lens, we now get faster 18-watt charging, which is very nice. Although this one does also support it, but you have to buy a separate charger. It comes bundled with the slower 5-watt charger. So while if you want a bit of a budget and just want an iPhone experience, definitely go for the standard 11. But if you want a slightly more premium matte finish, a little bit thinner bezels, high resolution OLED display, the telephoto lens, and also the much bigger battery lives, then the Pro and the Pro Max. The only couple of annoying things though are that it still uses the Lightning port cable, so pretty much everything else in my life is USB-C. I'll still have to bring along a Lightning cable. It's also still really annoying that 64 gigs is the base storage option on all three iPhones, even the crazy £1,100 Pro Max, which is a bit unacceptable. Just a quick intermission here because you may notice the lighting's changed a bit and perhaps the audio's a little bit different. And that's because about 2/3 of the way through my recording yesterday, the microphone decided to stop working, which was fun. So that's now in the bin. Let's get back to the Google Pixel 4 XL and the 4 because I really do like these phones and I am about this close, literally that close, to switching to this and making it my day-to-day phone. But there's a couple of problems, the main one being the battery life. Apple has proven that the size of the battery doesn't necessarily always equate to actual battery life, although we have seen with the bigger batteries in these phones that it's made a big difference. Even though these are, you know, Android phones made by Google, so that whole vertical integration thing as well, they're just not big enough. And when it's paired with a dynamic 90 Hz refresh rate screen, and on the case of the XL, a quad HD resolution, which does look good, these are beautiful screens. It's been quite a while since I've used a phone where I've worried about the battery life this much. And honestly, it will barely get me to 9 PM in the evening, and that's with average use. If your setup includes a wireless charger, you can top it up throughout the day, then absolutely fine, no problem. But if you do need to rely on the battery, right now at least, that is the Achilles heel for me of the Pixel 4, which is really frustrating actually, because there's a lot I really do like about the Pixel. For me, it's always been about the stock Android software. Obviously, we've got Android 10 here with dark mode and the nice gestures, and also, of course, the camera. Google's software processing proved that more lenses doesn't necessarily equal better, but now we have triple lens setups on a lot of these phones, including the iPhones. It feels like Google concentrate on a couple of technical areas, which it can do really well with the motion sensing radar and of course the camera processing, but then everything else is kind of like the bare minimum. We've only got 6 gigs of RAM, only got 64 gigs of storage on the base model, relatively small batteries, no ultra wide lens, it can't do 4K 60 on the back, can't do 4K on the front, which most of these can. Design wise, as soon as I picked this up, it felt a bit like a mid-range Nokia phone, which isn't a terrible thing, but it doesn't feel like a flagship. But then again, aside from the battery size, a lot of those are kind of like fringe benefits. They're not really deal breakers for me at least. And they've nailed the software and they've nailed the camera, although I do miss an ultra wide lens. And also the new astrophotography mode is really, really impressive. Although as you've probably heard, you can actually unlock it with your eyes closed. But let's give it a test. So if I close my eyes, pick it up, yeah, it unlocked it. So hopefully that's something Google will fix. And also the fact that it doesn't have a fingerprint reader. A lot of banking apps don't support that kind of face unlocking to let you in, so you still have to use your old password or code. I do really like the Pixel 4 XL. I just wish the battery was a bit better, and I would be scared about what the battery life would be like in a year or two's time with regular use. Its smaller brother, the standard Pixel 4, is actually quite interesting because there aren't many flagship phones that you can use one-handed anymore. Everything's just got bigger and bigger, aside from maybe the iPhone 11 Pro. And of course, it still comes with that great software and the great camera. But again, the battery with a 2,800 mAh cell is just too small. And even though it has a full HD rather than quad HD resolution, I found it actually gets me about half an hour less than the XL. So for a power user, simply not good enough, unfortunately. All right, now let's move on to the OnePlus 7T, and I reckon this has potential for phone of the year, just in terms of sheer value for money, bang for buck. The 7T will set you back £550, and for that, you get 8 gigs of RAM, 128 storage, a pretty capable triple camera setup, solid battery life, 90Hz screen, a really nice design, a Snapdragon 855 Plus, so the latest, greatest processor. And actually one of my favorite parts is the software. Oxygen OS 10 built on top of Android 10 is one of the nicest, smoothest Android experiences you can get next to, say, the Pixel series. And all in for £550 or $600, because the 7T will also be coming to the US. Honestly, the only area it falls down a bit is with the cameras, which are good, they are solid, and they do keep getting better with quite frequent updates actually, but unfortunately they don't quite keep up with everything else on this table. So if camera quality is like your #1 priority, then maybe this isn't the best option for you. But it gets interesting because then we have the 7T Pro, its bigger brother, and really, there's not a whole lot in it. And while it's a £150 price difference, this is $700 versus $550, I don't think it's really worth paying that extra for. The only real differences are a Quad HD resolution, the curved display around the side, which looks and feels a little bit nicer, but some people do prefer a flat screen. And of course, also we have the pop-out selfie camera, so there's no notch or anything, it's a full edge-to-edge screen. There's really not much in it between these two, so in terms of pricing, I think this absolutely is the one to go for. And I do quite like the taller 20:9 aspect ratio. It just feels a bit more comfortable to hold. And it's also slightly weird that the 7T series doesn't have a 5G option. If you want 5G, then you're still stuck with this slightly older 7 Pro. But don't get me wrong, while this is a relatively minor upgrade from the 7 Pro, and value for money wise, the 7T I think is better, this actually is one of my favorite phones at the moment. And so while it's easy to give it a hard time for not being much of an upgrade, and also not that much different from the standard 7T, this is still taken one of the best phones of the year for me and just made it a little bit better. So we can't really complain that much. So that's all the phones I've got in front of me, but there's a couple more I want to show you. First up, the ASUS ROG Phone 2, and quite simply, there's no better gaming phone out there. With its massive 6,000 mAh battery, the 120Hz OLED screen, and of course the range of accessories you can buy for it. Yes, there are other good gaming phones, but there's nothing else quite like this with that screen, the battery life, the mods. The only slight downside is the camera, which is basically the same setup as the Zenfone 6, which is okay. It's about the same, almost as good as the OnePlus phones. Although the Zenfone 6 was actually really cool because that camera flipped round, so you ended up having a really good selfie camera with an ultra-wide lens. So like with every phone, there's some compromise, and with the ROG phone, it's the camera, which is okay. And if having the best camera in the world isn't your priority, then it's an incredible phone. There's nothing else quite like it. And if you're a mobile gamer, then highly recommend it. Speaking of big phones, there's also the Huawei Mate 20X. I recently did a video on the 5G variant, but actually I wouldn't recommend that because it's a lot more expensive, it has a smaller battery, and the 4G version that came out earlier this year is just much better value. You get a big screen, big battery, and so if you want to play games or just use it as a sort of media consumption device, then I think the Mate 20X is still definitely worth considering. And finally, the Samsung Galaxy Fold, which is just in a category of its own. There's nothing else quite like it. Obviously, Huawei have their version, but it's not on the market yet. You can actually go out and buy the Fold right now if you want to. Although it will cost you the best part of £2,000. So for most people, it's not even going to be an option. But if you've got seriously deep pockets and just want something a bit different, then this is worth considering. My only complaint is the small front screen, which feels a little bit claustrophobic and not particularly nice to use. But what you end up doing is just opening it up all the time and revealing the big tablet screen, which just makes everything from browsing the web, playing games, watching videos. It's an incredible experience. Of course, when it's closed, it's about the thickness of two phones, so that's worth bearing in mind, but it is also narrower. It feels more like a fashion accessory or a piece of jewelry in some regards than a smartphone. But it is a flagship phone with loads of cameras, top-end specs, and of course a really big tablet screen, so it is still worth considering. Now it goes without saying that of course this is all my opinion, and of course there are loads of other phones out there that I've not been able to consider. I've done the best I can with what's available to me here in the UK. I think for me, if I had a Galaxy Fold, I would consider actually using that every day, but unfortunately I don't. So for me, I'm going to narrow it down to these 4 phones for the best flagship of 2019. Pixel 4 XL, OnePlus 7T Pro, Note 10 Plus, or iPhone 11 Pro Max. But now I want you to vote in the poll at the top right, and also let me know why in the comments below which one you think I should use, and whichever one wins that vote, I will switch to as my day-to-day phone for the rest of the year, or at least until a new flagship comes out that I need to test. I'm actually really looking forward to hearing what you guys think, because I go over and over in my head like, oh, well, I want to go for the 7T Pro because I like the 90 Hz, I like Android 10, and also there's obviously the software with Oxygen OS, but then again, the Note does have the S Pen. It's also a 5G model here, which is useful because I have a 5G SIM. I think the Pro Max is a really good size. I love the cameras on it. And then the Pixel is nothing like that with the astrophotography. Stock Android 10 is really nice. We've got the radar motion sensing, which means you can just pick it up and it automatically unlocks, which is really handy. Do let me know what you think the best flagship phone of 2019 is in the comments below and why. And if you did enjoy the video and want to see more from me for whatever reason, then make sure you do hit that little subscribe button down below and ding that notification bell and all those other YouTuber cliches. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.